But we also, to Brian's point, we really need the city's got to play ball with us.
We gotta get that.
Because it could be a
taken
moot
care of.
point. I don't think that there's any, I personally doubt that there's any issue. Maybe they just haven't gotten to it yet. It may not be on their agenda for a couple more weeks or whatever. But at the same time, Doug, you probably ought to
Make a phone call.
call the mayor and say, we really need to get this voted on and approved by your council.
I think they were waiting on you all to do that, and they knew you were meeting on it.
Right, because there was
Tonight.
an email that came out where the mayor acknowledged that, and he was glad that we'd gone ahead and taken the lead.
Well,
We'll get
then,
signatures on this, and I'll communicate it through my channel. Here's a signed document, and I'll copy the mayor, because that's okey dokey. And then I'll let Doug,
Okey dokey.
okay.
we've been through this. I don't want to go through all the details, but you know, these interlocal cooperation agreement wars, we've been going through with them for like 5 or 6 years.
And
I
to
don't
be
wanna get
fair,
back
I'll
into
I'll
that.
retract what I said. They are waiting on us, so they may be very willing to move this right along.
Exactly.
So I retract that that implication that they're holding us up.
I'd encourage you all to speak with your, I mean, you all have contacts on the council and friends there, and colleagues, so I'd encourage you to just reach out and say, hey, here's what we did, and hope you guys can move it forward, and we'll do the official channel stuff.
Okay. All right, so I think we've got a little bit of a plan for the time being anyway. Let's move on, unless anybody has anything else to add.
Well, so where we're moving on is Doug's gonna pick somebody with some input,
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right.
but not until after this document's
That gets
executed.
signed.
Exactly.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
That's where we're at.
I'm glad you clarified that.
No, so I don't know if you want to start I guess it's a question whether or not you want to start incurring fees or not. I'm
Well-
just saying, who knows how, do
No,
we have
that's-
any feel how long it's going to take for this to be?
Well, that's
Well,
Matt's
that's
Matt's
what he's
point.
saying.
That's what he said.
That's
was
Matt's
to
point,
get
Brian.
The
You don't do
document
anything until
signed
that's signed.
by the
Okay, well,
city.
we may be sitting around waiting for this for a while. I don't know. I have no.
Well, I know Haney's not responding. Have you tried Albrecht, Ashley?
No.
She's much more responsive.
Well, I didn't mention any names. You don't know who I sent it to, and I'm not saying
Well,
on air.
that's fine. I know on air that one of them never responds in emails.
Well, you would have him get started, have Brian,
About it now.
You
excuse
can
me.
at least
Well,
start
I'm
some
just trying to give you
conversation.
guys options. So, I mean, if they turn this thing around and in their next meeting, no harm, no foul.
Well,
Then Doug can do it without a signed contract.
Doug can make some calls and
Yeah.
start talking to
I'll
some
buy you
people
lobster
without
dinner.
That's
anything.
true. He can start talking to people. I would suggest if you have somebody that you want Doug to talk to, an architect firm that you want Doug to talk to, you ought to let him know.
Right, okay.
And then he can think about it and reach out. So it's not a surprise, at least.
Okay, I think we're in agreement. Let's move on to Standard and Poor's Rating Service. Is this you, Angie? Or is this,
Yeah, I'm gonna let Angie explain it. We had a phone conversation with Standard & Poor's. Angie and I did, and we got back a AA rating on our bonds, which is really good.
Yeah.
So I guess I would like for Angie to discuss a little bit, because there were some questions we had, what they had stated in the report, but we got them corrected. So since Angie talked to them, I will, about that issue, I'll let her address it.
So this is part of, because we have bond ratings on the 2000 fire station bonds as well as the park bonds, every 3 years, Standard & Poor's does what they're called their annual surveillance. So they reach out to local governments and go back through kind of the same credit quality conversation we had back when we issued the debt. They recently changed their credit criteria for general obligation bonds, those payable by property tax. So they have been, this year, really making an outreach to reach out to all those local units of government that have current bond ratings. So we set up a phone call, or they set up a phone call with Doug, and he and I took that from the office here. Kind of wanted to go through what's changed in the township since we've met last. What kind of developments have occurred? What are you seeing in just growth, permits, residential, assessed valuation? Really just trying to get a sense of what's happening in the community. Normal conversation, normal questions. We went through everything. We sent them quite a bit of financial information, provided some additional detail for them to use in their analysis. They came back and affirmed the AA stable rating that we had achieved back in 2004. Really great rating. The highest rating that a government could be rated by Standard & Poor's is AAA. The township is AA. So, very high for a township. One of the challenges I think they noticed, in the rationale, we had some questions on that, was they look at, fund balances and they look at budgets. One of the things that we discussed that came up was a few years ago when there were, quite a bit of funds dispersed to handle, I think, some of the capital items. This really came after townships began getting reviewed for, cash on hand from the state. There were some expenditures that the township made saying, okay, we have a little bit extra cash, we'll make some expenditures. They did note the spend down of cash balance for that. They also noted, as you all know, that the township also has provided assistance to the city and outside of the fire contract for those one-time expenses. That also did come up in our conversation because that did also decrease our overall fund balance. So those are things as well we had to discuss, saying we have assisted in the past above and beyond the fire contract. We anticipate that that is going to terminate in the future. That annexed area will be 100% on the tax rolls for the city. They'll be able to collect the money they need from the taxpayers to fully fund those operations, but that was a conversation as well. One of the words in here that gave me heartburn, and I immediately followed back with S&P before they published the report, was they used the word deficit. Anytime I see the word deficit, I'm thinking it's a cash deficit, meaning where, there's a negative value. And they explained that in this sense, it really was looking at the annual revenues to the annual expenditures, where we had exceeded some expenditures over revenues. A lot of that, again, was just coming down to spending down some of that fund balance. Some of the additional funds we had provided to the city, I think, weighed in on that. They noted that there's been, of course, strong growth in the township. They still feel this is a really good community. Doug does a great job on management. He had a lot of detail. I think a lot of townships don't. He had his capital improvement plan. I chuckle at his documentation, but he has one. It's on his yellow notepad.
Give me a pad of paper.
Yeah, but of course, those are things that they look for. Those are questions that they ask. Really, just the management. How often does Doug give updates on financials? For you all, that's easy. You have a financial section every time your board meeting, so it's discussed every month or whenever your meetings are. So I think Doug got a lot of credit for the good work that he and Debbie's done at the office on management. Those are just questions that as you read through this, if you have questions on some of the words, that I may have asked those same questions when we followed up. Unfortunately, the word deficit and how they portray that is their standard language. So they were not willing to make a change on the language that I had suggested, but overall, it's a really good rating. I told, Doug gets concerned when he sees some of those words. This is really strong. It's gonna help when we get to the bond process as well. It's just an affirmation to the bond market that the townships is a healthy, stable governmental unit.
Angie, do you think it's fair that they said, among other things, in some of these bullet points, we view the township's budgetary performance as weak overall? And then another bullet point, in our opinion, Clay Township's debt and contingent liabilities profile is weak, with total governmental fund debt. I mean,
Those are really, what they're looking at there, because those are questions we asked, a lot of it comes down to actually the size of the entity. Because the township itself and its relative size on the revenues that are brought in, it's going to have and be viewed in a more of a weaker context. Not necessarily because there's weak decisions being made, but the fact that the size of it anyway, and overall, when you're looking at some of those expenditures and things we've spent, they look at it that way. So I had asked those questions too. Is there a way we can change what you're saying? Because when I'm on the phone, you're telling me it's positive. However, we see this was news to me. We called back and asked before this was published to make changes. Unfortunately, that's just how they have their scoring criteria. And that is where that was at. But they said, when I had the conversation, don't take that as what we would probably see as something as a weak management and take insult to maybe we're not doing something that we should. A lot of it's just in the grand scheme of thing for budgets and for size of community as well. And the township itself is relatively a small budget.
yeah.
Looking at compared to other, governmental units.
Are you familiar with a lot of governmental units that have AAA ratings?
The state,
State of Indiana, there's 11 states that have a AAA rating.
Indianapolis did just got downgraded in the last 2 years. So, but no, it's really uncommon for local units of government to have a AAA. For a township, I think, for still being a relatively small unit and to have a AA, I think is really strong. A majority, I would say, I don't say majority, but a lot of units we work with are maybe a AA minus, maybe in the A category. I think A is pretty standard. You see, and Carl may have some insight as well, some of the credits he's, underwritten, but a lot of times you see A categories. I think AA is very strong. It's gonna give a great message when we go out to actually market the new bonds.
So this, we were talking about not using cash on hand. But is part of that to why we need to
A
keep?
lot of it is, I think we need to start building up more of that cash balance, the funds on hand that we had in the past. Just really try to build up more of that so we have a stronger cash position. We'll continue, of course, to have the balanced budget that we do, but anything that where we can increase cash balances, increase the rainy day fund, or just build up general fund balance is gonna improve.
Because we had talked, so if we didn't spend down any current monies, which is what we've decided not to do. But we had talked about using the money from the fire co-ed that we weren't gonna give to the city anymore and using it towards this project. Are you saying we should not do that anymore? Because I think that was gonna be another $1.5 million.
I would look at that because we'll look and see where the funds are this year for the fire contract. Looking at where we are, I would advise against expending that amount of cash, just because I think it's a good time to borrow. Interest rates are still very low, and if we're able to borrow at a low cost of capital, keeping those funds on hand for other things that may come up, especially with all the changes that we're seeing, if something were to happen, personal property, if something were to happen and we lose assessed valuation and tax revenue, I just think at this point in time, with all the questions, if we can be as prudent as possible and actually try to keep some of those funds retained with the township, it's best for us to do that, as opposed to putting it towards the construction project when interest rates are still at a really good, low cost of borrowing.
So, and I guess it's more, I explain that, I understand that we need the strong cash position to get the good rating and everything. But the theory that I have trouble with is we're holding on to taxpayers' money for to what end? If it's not going back into the community, to what end are we holding it?
Well, and I think when we're saying we're holding on to taxpayers' money, I don't have the current fund balances. I'm not sure if we have as much cash on hand as maybe, I'm not sure what dollar value you think that we have.
Well, I don't think we're strong right now.
Let me say something here. Shortly after I came in office, this township was in very good condition, or being stable, very, very stable. You turn around and remember when we went into the recession and there was a lot of governmental agencies saying, well, township's hoarding money.
Yeah.
Well, Doc Dillon, when he was president of the board, we talked about it. And he says, well, maybe we need to get rid of some of it, okay? Mistake. It was a mistake. And I even had taxpayers tell me, you should never have done that. What we did is we turned around, we bought $1 million aerial for the fire department.
Right.
We added an extension to this fire station of $750,000. So we started doing those kind of things, thinking maybe we shouldn't hold on to this money. But everybody, when they seen what we were doing, I had a few taxpayers come here and says, you know what, you shouldn't have done it. You should have held on to the money. So what we're going to try to do is we can capture up to 10% of some of our funds and throw it into our fire fund. So that's what I'm doing. Also, and I don't know, I just went to a meeting,
Into the fire fund?
Into the rainy day fund.
I'm sorry, what did I say, the fire fund?
Fire fund.
I'm sorry, yeah, rainy day fund.
Yeah.
But I just found out, okay, right now we have, on our bond for Central Park, we have a 6 months bundle of money in there, so when something would happen or we wouldn't get our tax draw or whatever, we could still pay it at that 6 month mark. Well, so you could capture up to 50%. We were just told in a meeting that I was at with DLGF is now any new debt, you can only capture up to 15%. You can only hold on to 15%.
And a lot
But-
of that was driven by when we actually issued the park bonds. In order to have an additional 6 months of capitalized interest at that point was advantageous for the rating agency standpoint. So we capitalized an additional 6 months as well and had the tax rate for that. So there was an additional capitalized interest period where I think really probably set some of that cash position back when those were issued back in '04.
So we've learned from mistakes of unloading money quickly, but I would like for another meeting to have the conversation though with this new income that we're not giving to the city. I think we should find a happy medium of what to hang on to and what we can put back in the community, even if it's 80/20. I mean, but I do think some of that money needs to.
And I think that could be helpful too. I mean, one of the questions I asked, do you actually have cash, investment policies or cash fund balance policies? So those are something I think the board can consider. If that's something that's important, you can actually look at and actually maybe putting a policy down saying, our goal is to have, 50% of the budget at all times, an operating fund, just some of those internal goals. And those are something that definitely we could work
That's one of the
together
things
on.
that, I probably shouldn't have told them, but that was another thing, is I would like to have in each fund 50% of our budget always in there. So if we don't get a tax draw, if something happens, who knows? That's why it's a little nerve-wracking when they said, instead of now capturing the 50% on your debt service, you can only go 15%. And I think, wow, what happens if the state doesn't give us our tax draw? Something happens. I mean, who knows what might happen?
That's a great goal, and maybe we can get to that. We need to
Well,
come up
that's
with a
what we're going to be
policy.
working on, so.
I'll bet you there aren't a lot of townships around that have that luxury of a
No.
cash balance.
No,
And those
because
are just something I think to work for. This is our goal, and maybe when we start, the budget season's coming up, maybe we look at those cash balances to see, okay, ideally, this is what we'd like to have. What room do we have each year to start maybe, slowly, incrementally, providing some more cash balance and building up those fund balances.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Please, no. Financial questions from the board.
None.
I've got several.
Go. Board comments.
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone who presented what their organizations were about today. We really do hope that we can fund as much as possible, but we have to look through them to decide what really is what the Township Board needs to focus on. But we are grateful that people come forward and ask, and if we can help, we will.
Matt?
I've got nothing.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody that hung in here as long as they did. This was a heck of a good meeting tonight. We covered a lot of ground with the grant requests. This is the longest Township Board meeting I think I've ever been associated with, and I think we lost Hal hours ago. Any announcements?
I do have a couple of things. I'm sorry. Mary, Jennifer McFarland, which is the Director of Food and Nutrition Services with the school. Remember your question you asked about kids going,
Right.
having their meals thrown out? They've got something in place, but they are looking at if we would consider helping. So they're going to talk to and Brian, I'm telling you this for a reason. They're looking to have their attorneys look at it, whether we can legally do that. And so I'm asking you, I don't know if we can legally, in other words, if a kid has, they don't have enough money to pay for their food,
The
their
school
school
lunches.
lunches, are we able to, like, on a monthly deal, we talked about doing it monthly, that if they have some kid that really couldn't afford it and is in a deficit, can we step in and help? That's something you probably need to look up for us.
What they had was schools that were throwing out meals of kids that owed money to the school, and they just took the trays away from them and dumped them.
Not in Carmel, but.
Not here, no, that's
but
why I corrected the minutes.
That's why you corrected
but-
that, right.
But if we do have some schools that are in need, as we heard
So,
earlier.
I just want to let y'all look into it. And also, Michael Klitzing wants us to get together, have a meeting. We need to have a meeting to discuss their capital expenditures over the next few years. And he's doing that with us and the city, but we need a date, July 29th or 30th. I know, Matt, you and Paul probably can't do it during the daytime, right?
I can do whatever you need.
Okay, July 29th or July 30th, I could set a meeting up for us to, and that's all we're gonna do, would be let him address capital expenditures for the parks. Nothing else. I will email you to let you know. If you guys just get back with me, because Debbie's kept July 29th and 30th open, and I promise you, we'll just keep it to that. It's on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night, and we could do it, the earlier the better. What's the earliest anybody can do it, 6 o'clock? Paul, I guess
Oh,
it's
yeah,
you.
all right.
You mean in the
Is
evening?
that the earliest you could do it?
Yeah.
Okay, so 6 o'clock, it'd be on July 29th, 30th, and we'll get together, And he's just gonna come in here and tell us about capital expenditures for parks and what they're doing.
For-
Parks,
Okay.
capital expenditures.
Oh, their new,
Yeah, their budget is coming up, so he wants to go over that with both us and the city. Okay? And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody at all? Going once? May I have a motion for adjournment?
I so move.
Is there a second? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.